Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd really love that. If you're returning, how you doing? What we're going to be talking about today is the real reason behind inflation and soaring prices. Now, usually in the grocery industry, I know quite a few of you work in the grocery industry, retail industry, okay? A price increase generally would happen maybe once a year, right? Maybe every 2 years, okay? But when Mr. 19 hit, companies started raising prices every 3 to 4 months, which is actually unheard of. Now, for a while, the price hikes made sense, right? Supply chains were snarled, manufacturers were paying more for ingredients needing to make their products. Companies were having to offer big wage hikes to lure workers, and consumers were buying everything in sight, right? But around October, something odd happened. Cost pressures from the invasion and supply chain crises were easing. And there was inventory on the shelves, and shoppers were doing less compulsive buying, yet the prices were still going up. So in the past, food manufacturer business success was gauged. It was gauged by how many products they sold. And if they weren't selling enough, they'd offer deals, sales to entice the customers. Now, instead of trying to sell a higher volume at a lower price point, it seemed as if these companies, they realized, and what they realized was they could raise prices and still bring in the same amount of money. They can sell half of what they need to sell, but they're hitting those profit numbers already. And prices are stabilizing right now in this year, 2023, but there's one thing they're definitely not doing. And what they're not doing is they're not coming down. Okay. Now, anyone who has reached for a carton of eggs, filled up their gas tank, tried to buy pretty much anything, has felt this sting of that inflation over the past few years. And while many of these problems that help trigger the upward spiral have abated, prices are still high and they're getting higher. And the data is increasingly pointing to one culprit, and that's corporate profit hoarding. And given the relative impunity big business enjoys, there may not be much relief for Americans' wallets anytime soon. So the sudden economic start, stop of the pandemic actually caused a dramatic mismatch between supply and demand, fueling a once-in-a-generation inflation flare-up. But more than 3 years since the dislocations, if you will, began, many of the logistical and the labor messes have started to normalize. And labor market disruptions were actually a prime suspect in soaring inflation just last year. So economists and the Federal Reserve, they actually suggested that workers demanding higher wages is the key to inflation. And despite things getting back to normal, inflation still remains high. And there are two important indicators here that have not returned to normal, and that's corporate profits and profit margins. So if inflation is the Scooby-Doo villain that's running amok, the actual monster underneath the mask is companies realizing that they can get away with charging more and more and more. And the idea that companies are taking advantage of these said disruptions to push price increases on consumers has many names. Greedflation, excuseflation, price gouging, corporate profiteering, but the gist is still the same. So large corporations use this guise of disruption to raise prices beyond what their cost would suggest is necessary, or what economic theory would suggest is actually prudent, which is squeezing higher profits out of cash-strapped customers. So supply chain issues and other disruptions made sense. It made sense as drivers of higher prices, but the degree in which companies pushed higher prices in an effort to not only pass on cost increases, but also increase their profits and their margins. And it made it clear that corporations were just trying to use this environment to pad their bottom lines. So companies that don't fall in line and try to undercut their rivals to attract deal-conscious customers, they face discipline for not following this status quo. So like take Target, take Walmart, for example, which both of them tried to weather some of the cost without raising prices in an attempt to hold on to customer loyalty. This effort to keep prices low was actually greeted with disdain, and investors saw the price hike driven profits being made by competitors and sold off their Walmart and their Target stock, in effect penalizing their pricing strategy. So inflation patterns, okay, it's a monopolistic concentrations in some sectors made price increases worse than they really had to be. And if there's no one challenging you with better deals or cheaper goods, you have this free reign almost to hike prices as you wish. And consumers seem to be buying these stories, right, that seem to justify these price increases, but which really serve as a cover for profit margin expansion. When supply chains began to ease and companies they found another useful red herring, if you will, for these price hikes. Greedy workers, right? They said greedy workers who wanted more money were forcing them to raise pay, which forced them to raise the cost. It's called cost of living, you jerks, right? You can't expect people to live on $7 an hour, $8 an hour, and expect them to live. It doesn't work that way. So instead of workers driving inflation by asking for higher wages, employees were just desperately pushing to keep their pay comparable to already rising cost of goods, right? You got, if okay. Just let's take rent, for example, okay? Back in, 2019, here in the Tampa Bay area, you could rent a house like mine for about $700 a month. Now, you can't touch this house for less than $3,000 a month. So take that $8 an hour that you were making in 2019, and because that was literally Florida's minimum wage back then. Okay, I'm being serious with you. Okay, and they didn't want to give raises. I mean, it literally took a push for $10, $12, $15. Okay, well, you can't make $8 an hour and have literally your average, seriously, average rent around here is no less than $2,000 a month. You would literally have to have 4 jobs, 4 incomes coming in order to just pay the rent, nothing else. So for these companies to have the balls to say, well, it's because employees wanted more money, it's called cost of living. How about I give you $8 an hour and see if you can go and live on that? All right, just saying. Okay, so until you can prove to me that you can live on $8 an hour, shut up and give these people a raise. Because to live here in Tampa There's no way possible. And I mean none. None. Okay? So if you have to pay more for your groceries, more at the pump, more for your utilities, but everything else is getting also more expensive, you end up being squeezed, right? In such a situation, people demand higher wages to protect their standard of living. But it's not just a standard of living, it's living, having a roof over your head. Wage increases are, for the most part, triggered by inflation rather than the other way around. And in the meantime, though, consumers are left adjusting their budgets, cutting back, racking up unattainable amounts of debt, as the food that they eat and the everyday goods that they need remain expensive, more now than ever. And it's really not corporations who end up paying the cost in the end. Because when their costs go up, they can just push that back onto us, the consumer, with higher prices and protect their profit margins. It's the consumers and the workers that really have ended up paying the cost of inflation. So while they're still lining their pockets, we're the ones that are suffering, not them. So, all right, guys, I'm out of here. I'll see you in the next one, okay? You stay safe, you stay positive, you keep prepping, and as always, fearless. Ciao.